Here we go. So everybody that's joining, let me just give you a preview. I just posted on Facebook a couple hours ago that this is the demo that I'll be doing later. It's either a long necklace, or you can wear it doubled, or you can wear it as a 5 around wrap. And I've got some stones laid out on these trays that I tried to color coordinate and put in groups that you could use to make that bracelet or something else if you wish. But I just kind of want to give you a preview here of what's coming up. There's a lot of stones to show you, some really pretty stuff. I've got a new batch of really beautiful 3mm like I use to make the crocheted bracelets that we've got a YouTube video on. Some colored tiger eye, and besides the higher end stones that I posted on Facebook that I'll show, I also decided just to pull out a few of the really pretty cabochons that we've gotten lately that so this is the kind of the doubled necklace look, and you can see that I've used about 2.5 inches of chain on the end and then a lobster claw, so it could be hooked at various lengths. And what I had used were 2 strands, these two, and when I say strands, these are the strands I just showed you, so they're the shorter 7 to 8 inch strands. I used a strand of 7mm tourmaline, a strand of 7mm iolite, a strand of 5mm, excuse me. These, I think they are labeled 4mm, but they're a little tiny bit bigger than that. These are the kyanite. And then I also used a short strand of the blue spot Jasper Hishi. Along with the blue lace agate. Now, that wasn't a strand. I just pulled a couple accent stones out of my bowls because I wanted just a spot of something a little bit different in here. And then materials other than stones. Of course, I've got the larger sized lobster clasp, which is a 15mm. Here's my new one. I pulled these for my demo. Yeah, it's 15 by 9mm. And then I used not quite a package. I made about 38 dangles, you know, give or take. You could do whatever you wanted, but I used the thinner 24 gauge head pins for that, the 2-inch ones, and then an equal number of jump rings. In my sample, I'm going to do the gold, but I used copper for this. On the head pins, I used galvanized permanent finish seed beads. I like them because they don't change, they don't tarnish, and the coating doesn't wear off. So in this case, I used antique copper. In my demo, I'm going to use these pewter Duracoat size 11s, which are the same as a 2mm round bead if you want to use metal. I also used about 80 of these hematite plated dice beads, which I showed you earlier. On my sample, I'm going to use some gold ones tonight, and I actually have some gold and rose gold coming one of these days if it ever gets here in an order soon. And at least the last time I bought them, they were $5.99 for a 16-inch strand. and I quite like them, although you could use any metal or stone bead. I just kind of like adding a little bit of metal to set up the stones in the necklace. And I used about a little more than 2 yards worth of waxed cord. Now, what size of wax cord you use is going to depend on your bead hole size. I like the heavy stuff because I like to be able to see a nice big knot between my beads. And so tonight I'm going to use, it's actually 0.8 millimeter polyester waxed beading cord. I like the synthetic fibers the best because I think they last, they have the best durability. They're also color fast, and they don't biodegrade, they don't degrade over time if you get them wet or sweat on them, etc., and they don't lose their color. So I am going to use this waxed again, but if it seems too bulky for you and the holes in your beads, you could use the regular Eslon beading cord. This is closer to a 0.5 millimeter, so it's a little bit smaller. And of course, you'll want to get some beeswax so that you can wax the end well to get your bees strung. You will not be able to put a needle on this and still get it through a normal size bead hole. So both of these need wax. And if you have really small holes, like let's say you want to use those zircons or something tiny, you could use the number 6 silk that we have here. This is even smaller, and there's 2 meters on a card, which is 39 inches times 2. So this is also about 2.5 yards, which is just about what I used. And I had some extra, that depends on your length. And then I also used some chain. So I pulled this one for tonight. You just need something big enough that your clasp is going to fit in it so that you can adjust it. Going to need a large eye needle, a tapestry type needle. This is a number 16, which is about the right size for this. And you're also going to need something to tie your knots with. You can use a T-pin. I like using a beading awl, and we have these for sale on our website also. I think this is a little bit easier to hold in your hand. And you'll need, of course, something to cut your cord. You'll need a pair of cutters for the dangles that you're going to make with your head pins, and a pair of round nose pliers, and at least, well, you really need a couple pairs of pliers that are flat to open and close your jump rings, but you could get away with 1 pair of pliers if you were careful not to squeeze your ring too hard with your round nose when you open and close it. So let's get started. Let me move some of my things off to the side. So I decided for this example to use these gold heishi as my metal beads, a strand of the 5 millimeter layer mark cubes, the 6 millimeter carnelians, the 6 millimeter mookites, and I'm going to use some 3 millimeter turquoise, which I also showed you some in the trunk show, as my dangles. And I pulled just a few accent beads just to have a little something different in it. And I cut my cord about 6.5 feet long, because knots take up more room than you realize if you haven't done this before. And I waxed the end of my cord, even though it's a waxed cord, really, really well. And started stringing on my beads. Now, the logic to this isn't a lot, because I like things to be kind of organic, so I didn't plan out, you know, an inch of this and an inch of that. I knew that I wanted to have, leading up to the clasp, what's going to be behind my neck most of the time when I wear it as a necklace, these little guys on both sides. So I started with some spacers, and I want to kind of split up my beads with kind of a break of spacers between each color change section. So I did that, and I slid them down from the end that I'm stringing them on towards the other end, so that as I knot, and that's going to continue to slide my beads apart, I would like the middle of the strand, when you wear it as a double-stranded necklace, which would be at about 18 inches, at least in that middle 18 inches somewhere, I would like to have the center section with my accent stones fall there. So I'm going to kind of keep track of the length. But other than that, I'm just going to continue to string my stones, and I like knotting from the other direction so that I can see how things are looking. So I started knotting on the other end, so I can take off or add different beads as I go. But I keep twisting. You want to twist your cord towards the direction that it's plied to keep it nice and tight. And if the bead hole's a little small, if you kind of screw the cord in towards the direction of the ply to make it tighter, that will make it smaller and smaller to go through your bead. So I'm going to string a few more of these on. So the stringing part doesn't have a lot of science behind it, other than it's the way I want things to look. And actually, I probably will get something different for this now that I'm looking at it, because it's a little murky. But I do like these grass green agates, so I'll probably still put those on together. And, you know, there were a couple parts in my sample that I showed you where I decided to live dangerously and mix a bead or two from a different section. Like I'm going to throw a carnelian in the middle of my my Larimar section here without using the gold beads as a break between them. So I think you get the picture of how the stringing process works. And when I started knotting at the other end, I left myself a good 6 inches to tie the knot around my lobster claw and or my chain. And to knot, if you haven't done this before, I'm going to slide them away to give myself some room from where I'm knotting. And I just tied an overhand knot here at the end to start off with. And I'm going to slide my bead down against what would have been my first knot. I'm going to tip this a little bit because I'm knotting at a really awkward angle. Sorry for making you seasick. So I'm going to hold the cord in my hand, and an overhand knot is simply making, I like to make a loop around my 2 fingers so that I've got a big enough opening to pull the beaded section that I've already done of my necklace through. And actually, I need to leave a little bit more room. Let's do that again. So when that happens, you don't have enough room. So let me slide this down a little bit further so I have more open space. Okay, there we go. So here's my knot. Wrap it around 2 fingers, slide it through the loop. Then I put my beading awl inside that loop that I made and draw it down to the last bead that I slid down. And then I'm going to grab another one and I'm going to try to hold it to the camera. I'm going to pinch with my thumb and my index finger that last bead that I just slid down against the knot that I've made, nice and tight. And you can see how my thumbnail's bending as I slowly pull out my beading awl or pin. And that keeps this knot nice and tight against my former bead. So let me do it again. Make a loop, bring the tail through, put my awl in, draw it up, slide the next bead down, make sure the awl with the knot is as close as you can get it to the last bead, and then push, 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 push as you pull that pin out. And see how it's kind of kinky? That's good. You want your knot so tight that it kinks, because guess what happens when you give it a couple pops? It stretches and they're perfectly tight and you don't have any gaps. So you want to make them overly tight. And again, here's my knot, here's my next bead, slide it down and knot. And you have a choice. Now, and this is where kind of your best judgment comes in, and, you know, measure along the way. When I said you could use 8s or 4s or 6s or whatever size you want, you know, that's going to affect how many beads you have in your strand. The bigger the beads are, actually, the shorter your strand's going to be when it's done, as weird as that sounds, because you're going to have less knots. And every knot actually adds quite a bit of length to your necklace. So that being said, if you have less larger beads, you may have to knot between every little bead to give you more length in your necklace. I know that sounds crazy, but I'll show you in a second what I mean. So here's my bigger ones. Again, the same thing. Now I decided that I would have enough beads in the last necklace that I made that I didn't need to knot between every spacer to add length. Let me show you what I mean. So I started off here on the end in the same way. I've got a knot after every little bead. But then I started thinking, that's going to give me a lot of length for all these little tiny beads, and I don't know if I want all that. So then I decided, making a decision, that every time I pulled up a group of these little spacers, maybe I would start leaving them in bunches and just knot, you know, after a section of 5, or pull up 3, make a knot, pull up 2, make a knot, pull up 3, make a knot. So as you can see throughout this necklace slash bracelet, I left them in groups because I didn't want them this broken up, and I knew I had plenty of beads to get out to the length that I wanted, so I could leave them together and make these shorter without knotting between each one. So I guess what I'm trying to say is kind of lay out all your beads and guesstimate how much length you're going to need to add to your necklace with knots. And you may want to leave some of your beads in groups, you know, maybe string a whole section of these mookites and not here without knotting in between them. And the only way to know that is to lay them all out and measure your length. And measure the length of your knots. And depending on what kind of cord you're using, that's going to vary. So on this heavy cord, a knot is a 1/16 of an inch. So 16 knots adds an inch to my piece. Get it? So if I'm going to use, let's say, for every 10 of these, if I'm going to knot between each one, okay, wait, now I'm getting myself confused. 16. So for every 16 of these, I'm going to add an inch. I maybe don't want a knot between each one if I do the math. And I say I want to use 100 of them. You know, that's a lot of inches in knots. So you could figure out how many knots you really need to get out to the length that you want, or you could add another strand of stones as you work. Now, once you get everything knotted, and my length after knotting and before adding chain and the clasp was 38 inches. So after you knot, you're going to want to finish your ends. So I'm going to finish this first end for you to show you how I did it. And I decided I'm going to use these little hematite beads on my head pins to kind of get this gunmetal in here so it's not all gold. So I'm going to knot right to the chain on one end of the bracelet. So I'm going to take my cord through, and this could also be my clasp. Same thing with my clasp. I knotted, I'll show you on this one, directly to the clasp, so there aren't any gaps from a jump ring or anything for my cord to slip through. You can see that. So I'm going to knot right to the chain. I'm going to take the cord through the last link, fold it back towards the necklace, and I'm leaving about 1/8 of an inch is all here. And then I'm going to take the needle, that big eye needle, and face it away from the necklace towards the chain, hold them together with my fingers, and I'm going to wrap that cord towards the necklace and fill up that little gap that I left between them. Took about 3 wraps. And then this is important. Remember, whatever direction you're wrapping, the eye needs to be at the opposite end. So I wrap towards the necklace. My eye is next to my chain. I'm going to take the cord through the eye, and I'm going to switch hands here in a second. And I'm going to keep these wraps pinched really tightly between my thumb and my index finger while I pull this through so that I don't leave any space. Nice and tight. And there we go. And I've got a nice wrapped knot here to terminate my piece at the end. I'm going to cut it, leaving about 1/4 of an inch of cord. And again, I said I liked using synthetics. This is one other reason why. This polyester will melt. Obviously, waxed linen is not going to. I'm going to take my lighter, and I'm just going to light that end and tap that molten blob of polyester in. And now I have a nice sealed knot that won't come undone. And then when I'm finished, I'm going to do the same thing on the other end for my lobster claw at 38 inches. And I'm going to add all these little wrapped guys around the knots in the large beaded sections. Now, again, that part's up to you. On this one, I know it probably looks a little crazy when you first look at it, like what was her logic to why they're there and not here? Well, when I double this around to make it a necklace, all of the areas that are going to end up behind my neck, I decided not to put these on. You might disagree with me, and I also didn't put them on between these great big beads in the front, but I didn't think I needed or wanted these little dangles hanging behind my neck. So as I double up the necklace to wear it, basically where these fall, where the dangles fall, are all of the points on the necklace that are in the front, so to speak. And then what goes behind my neck doesn't have the drops on them. And as you wear it on the bracelet, you know, having them in one place and not the other looks perfectly natural. So you'll need to determine where that is for you. And if you don't do wire work, I'll show you how I made these. Again, these are the thin 24 gauge head pins. And I added one of the seed beads with my little 3mm turquoise, and I'm going to put another one on. When I used the he-she, I decided to do a little seed bead on the bottom, a he-she, a seed bead, and another he-she. But I think for these, I'm just going to add one bead. And then you'll want to take your chain nose pliers. Here they are. Took me a second. And grasp right above that last bead with your pliers. Make a nice right angle bend. I'll turn it to the side so you can see what I mean. You want a straight angle here because that's going to allow you to center the loop on top. And I'm switching to my round nose pliers, and there's a number of ways to do this, but beginner way is nose right in that corner, and then bring the wire up and over, turn your hand and come underneath to finish your loop. Look at it and make sure you're centered. Fix it if you're not. And what you should see when you take your pliers out then is a pretty well centered loop right on top of that bend. I'm going to grab across the loop. I'm not in the loop, across the loop to hold on to it, and then take that tail and wrap starting under the loop all the way down to the bead. It's a little hard with my, with my iPad right above my hands here, but then I'm going to take my flat side of my pliers, the flush side, and cut that little extra tail off. And it's kind of got crooked. It was wrapping a little sideways. So you can straighten them up. And then I took my jump rings, and these are 4.5 millimeters, and they're about as small as you can use. You could actually go up to a larger size jump ring if you wanted to, but these are closed so nicely, and most of you know what I'm talking about if you've ever bought these. It's hard to find the opening. So 2 pairs of pliers. I thought that was the opening. I guess it wasn't, guys. And lift one side forward. I still didn't find it. There it is. Okay. Lift one side forward to open your ring and add your dangle. And I don't have that other bead on there, but let's do it here just for grins. So I'm going to insert that. Actually, these would be much better for this job. So I'm going to insert my my jump ring between two of the beads. Grab my other pair of pliers, and to close it, I'm going to reverse the motion, push them back so that they pass each other, and wiggle, wiggle, wiggle while I push them together to make sure I don't have a split there. And there we go. So those you could add wherever you wanted to. I decided on the last project I did here to put them between the large beads and not around the spacers, but I could have decided to have a completely different spot to put them in, and that would be okay too. So I'm going to keep knotting and adding those dangles, and then I'm going to finish it off on the other end. And if I feel like I'm coming up short at all, I can decide to put a few more spacers on before I get my knotting finished. Or you could always just use a little bit more extender chain, or even cut this and knot a piece of chain in the center of it and then knot a piece of chain on the other side and keep going. There's so many variations. But if anybody wants a kit with any of the chain and the clasps and the head pins and the jump rings for me to send out with the stones you've ordered, just let me know, and I'm happy to get with you to add those other items to your order so you'll have the cord and everything you need to put it together. Thanks for joining.